and welcome to part one of an 11-part series called The Long Road of Recovery. My name is Brad Sorowski. I'm 45 years old. I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, and I've also struggled with mental health issues my entire life. I'm currently working as an outreach addictions counselor. I'm a sought-after public speaker. I'm right now putting the finishing touches on my poetry book called Some Rhyme, Some Reason, All Heart, and beginning to set up a private practice as a mental health and wellness coach. So let's get this started. Part one of this 11-part series will consist of my story. My story will start at the beginning, when I was a child. It will start with the problems I dealt with then, and it will slowly segue into the struggles I had with mental health and addictions right up till the time of my recovery. Once I get to that time, that will be the end of this session. At the end of this session, I'll also introduce the 10 following sessions, as they are an integral part of my recovery. I want everyone to keep in mind that these 10 sessions are 10 things that I found important for my recovery. They're not necessarily going to be exactly like your recovery. But what I do believe is I do believe that parts of each one of these 10 workshops can be beneficial for anyone struggling with mental health or addictions problems. I'm a firm believer in keeping things short and sweet, so we're just going to get right to the point here, and I'm going to start telling my story. And my story starts as long back as I can remember. I think I was maybe 4 or 5 years old where these memories start. And I was raised in the late 70s and early 80s. And some of the mottos from parents back in those days were, children are meant to be seen and not heard. And if you showed emotion, they told you, I'll give you something to cry about. You know, stuff like that. So the children are meant to be seen and not heard thing, it kind of pushed me into my room. It kind of pushed me into myself, and I spent a lot of time listening to music and kind of being a little broody and, you know, being by myself. And then it wasn't that I didn't talk, because I talked quite a bit as a kid. It was that I was more afraid to show my emotions. Like, I was afraid to cry. I was afraid to talk back, because that's where that whole I'll give you something to cry about thing came in. And those things kind of started a cycle of a little bit of depression from spending time by myself, and some anxiety towards just opening up to adults especially. And it just caused me to kind of be really fearful of what I said or did. It almost caused me to not want to talk. Another part of my childhood that I think is important and pertains to this story is the fact that my parents were very hospitable people. They always have been, and they still are to this day. When you stop at my parents' house, they welcome you in with open arms, and one of the first questions they ask you is, can I get you a drink? And because of this hospitality, there was always, our place was kind of the center hub for all the community to gather. There was constantly Friday nights, Saturday nights. I remember as far back as I can remember, actually, I remember quite a few of the people from our community gathering at our place and drinking, smoking cigarettes, playing cards, a lot of the things that people did back then and still do now. It wasn't an uncommon thing for me to wake up to somebody passed out on our couch, or, you know, you'd come upstairs and there would be somebody like sleeping in their chair because they've had too much to drink. These were common occurrences throughout my childhood. I don't know if this is a normal occurrence in everyone's childhood, but they were very common throughout my childhood. So it was really no surprise when I went to my first party at 13 years of age that, due to my anxiety and due to the fact that I recognized socializing with drinking, that I had my first drink. And what happened at that age when I had that first drink was I realized it got rid of my anxiety. I wasn't afraid to talk to people anymore. I wasn't afraid to talk to my friends. I wasn't afraid to share my emotions. I wasn't even afraid to talk to adults. And most importantly, I wasn't afraid to talk to girls. And what I realized when I had this first drink also is that I was quite charming and quite witty. And I associated that with the drinking. I didn't realize this was a personality that I actually had developed myself. I had too much anxiety to ever show that in real life. I thought this was due to the alcohol. So all of a sudden I go from being this anxious, shy kid who can't talk to anyone to being this outgoing guy who is kind of the life of the party and is doing pretty good with girls. So, as you do when you find something that works for you, you keep doing it. So that's just what I did. I kept doing it. I kept drinking. And 13, 14 years old, you don't get out of your house all that often. I didn't drink that regularly, but I do remember one of the first times I drank. It was with a group of friends, and I ended up like power drinking and getting violently ill, throwing up in the backseat of my mom's car. And I remember that as I got older, the drinking started to progress. Like it went from being, I think around the age of 15, I started going out with friends. So it started being a Friday, Saturday night thing. And then as I got my license and was able to drive and kind of do my own thing and had a little more freedom, I started skipping school. Cut class on a Wednesday afternoon, go pick up a bottle and have a few drinks, right? And it went from being a Friday, Saturday thing to being a Wednesday, Friday, Saturday thing. And then every once in a while, I would hang out with my buddies on a Sunday, so it would become a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Wednesday thing. And by the age of 17, I was drinking, sometimes 3 or 4 days a week or more. And this, I just don't think is common occurrences for a 16 and 17-year-old kid. I also started to notice that due to me cutting school, due to my drinking, due to my interest in really anything else but school, my grades started to drop in grade 12 too. Luckily, I graduated with half decent marks, but by the time I graduated, the alcohol was really becoming a problem. I think over the next year, that should have really been a huge sign in my life of how big of a problem the drinking was, because I think once I graduated from high school, I think between the ages of 17 and 19, there was quite a few events that should have been a red flag right there for drinking becoming a problem. I failed out of my secondary school. I got kicked out of the first place that I lived in. I received 2 impaired driving charges, which led me to jail and also led me to my first addictions counselor. And everybody was like, lots of people were saying, including that first addiction counselor, were saying, you have a serious problem with drinking. And I said, I don't have a problem with drinking. I just have bad luck. All my friends drink. I just got caught drinking and driving. I had, as addicts often do, I had an excuse for everything. It was bad luck. It was this, it was that. I don't have a drinking problem. I remember actually specifically, I remember they had a test that you wrote in this detox center, or in this treatment center, sorry. And if you got more than 4 answers out of, I think it was 18 or 20 answers, if you answered more than 4 of those with the yes, you were considered to have a drinking problem. And I got 20 out of 20. And I remember saying it was the first test I ever got 100% on. And it was a big joke for me. It was like a badge of pride, or like I wore it like I was proud of it. But it was truthfully becoming a serious problem. After I got kicked out of secondary school, I kind of things were starting to become problematic, to say the least. I moved back to my hometown of Davidson, and I got a job there with a company that it'll come up again later on in the story. But Davidson just wasn't doing it for me. I wanted something more excited. I wanted a big party. I wanted the action of the city. So I moved to Saskatoon. And when I moved there, my drug use was starting to escalate a little bit. I was smoking some marijuana and doing some mushrooms, but it was more of recreational drug use and still quite a bit of heavy drinking. And after kind of kicking around Saskatoon for a year at odd jobs, I found a job that I really loved. I started working at a nightclub, and I started working at the door and as a bartender, and it wasn't too long before I had a fairly regular shift as a bartender at one of the busiest nightclubs in the city. And this was it. This was what I wanted to do. I was getting paid to party. There was women, there was booze, there was drugs, there was after parties. It was everything I wanted, and I was making a lot of money. It was not an uncommon occurrence for me to come home with $400 or $500 in cash and tips from one weekend shift. So I continued to work out in the nightclub, and as I continued to work in the nightclub, I started to progress up the ladder. I went from bartender to promotions manager, where I booked bands I booked some pretty big bands in my day, which was a pretty cool thing. And then I went up to kind of general manager of the club that I was working at. And as I progressed through up the ladder in this nightclub, my drug use also progressed. I went from, doing the marijuana and mushrooms and alcohol, like I said before, to now starting to experiment with heavier drugs. Like I was doing acid, I was taking ecstasy, I was drinking. And then when I was 24 years old, I was introduced to a drug that would change my life. I was introduced to cocaine. When I used that first line of cocaine, something in me changed, and it took me to some really dark places, that drug. It pretty much became my life. I gave up a lot of the things that I truly loved. I gave up family, I gave up friends. I gave up all my free time basically. And I've been lucky enough to live within an hour of my family my whole entire life. My sisters live in small towns close to me, and my parents live on a farm less than an hour away. And when I started using cocaine, I'd be lucky if I even seen them at Christmas time. All of the healthy group of friends I had that loved to do fun things, play sports, hang out, go watch a game, do whatever, I started to trade them in for friends that were night owls, that were cocaine users, that wanted to use drugs all the time, and they wanted to be around me, not because they liked me as much as the fact that I could bank and pay for all the drugs that we were doing. Basically, this drug just overtook my life, and it wasn't for the better. I was also still drinking an excessive amount of alcohol, probably upwards of 60 to 80 ounces a day on an average day, and I know a lot of people are like, get serious, but I really was. I worked in the nightclub, so I would start drinking a lot of days at 11 o'clock in the morning, and this is what an average day would look like for me. I'd have my first drink, which was usually 2 ounces of whiskey and about 2 ounces of Coke at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I'd have 4 or 5 or 6 more drinks like that before 3 in the afternoon. I'd often have these drinks with people I was meeting, by myself, didn't really seem to matter, I just drank. And usually by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I would start throwing in the occasional shot with the person who would wander in off the street. And by like 5 or 6 o'clock at night, I would start to feel what I refer to as a little bit sloppy. I would start to slur my words a bit, I'd start to get pretty lightheaded, a little bit of staggering, and so then I would use some cocaine to balance myself out. So usually around 6 o'clock I'd have my first line of cocaine, and if you don't know how alcohol and cocaine work, alcohol is a depressant and cocaine's a stimulant. So when I got that kind of sloppy feeling, because my nervous system was getting depressed, I would add in the cocaine and it would basically level me off. And this would be what happened for the rest of the evening. Between 6 o'clock at night and 4 o'clock in the morning, I would drink, do cocaine, drink, do cocaine, drink, do cocaine, drink, do cocaine. And lots of times it didn't even end at 4 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes it ended well into the next morning, 8 a.m. sometimes, and then I would just stay awake and go to work the next day. And this pattern carried on for years. It carried on for years in my life. I would party 6 days a week, sometimes more, depending on if I really needed a break, if my body told me, oh, you gotta stop. And sometimes I would party 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And eventually, at the age of 31, at the end of one of these long binges, I found myself face down on the floor and covered in my own piss and puke, and it felt like somebody was sitting, a huge person was sitting on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I was like really struggling to get the breath in, and I knew something was really wrong. So I was going to call an ambulance, and the first thought was, I can't call an ambulance. Ambulances cost money. So I called a cab, and when I went to the hospital, and they checked me into the hospital at 31 years of age, and I was having a cocaine and alcohol-induced heart attack. I'll never forget what the doctor told me that day. I remember specifically that it was late fall because I had just come from helping my boss take his dock out of the water, and he usually didn't do that till there was almost ice on the lake. So I remember it was late fall, and my doctor told me, he said, straight to my face, he said, "You're a very young man, and if you don't stop using drugs and alcohol, you'll be lucky to see Christmas." And I gotta be honest, it scared the shit out of me. It really did. I was petrified. I did not want to die. So I did what any smart person would do. I quit. I quit everything except for cigarettes, because I remember my doctor actually said quitting too many things at one time can actually be detrimental to your health. So I gave up alcohol and I gave up cocaine that day. I told my friends what was going on. I said, you either support me or you don't, but this is what's happening. And people were like, yeah, we support you, man, because you're kind of a fucking mess. So, you know, everything changed for me kind of that day. And I remember I had 2 solid years of sobriety because my doctor put me on heart medication. I went for tests regularly. And I remember at the 2-year mark, I went for a test and they said, you, like, what have you done? Everything's fantastic. I had lost a lot of weight. I'd started walking and become more physically healthy. And the doctor said, what have you done? You look amazing. And I said, oh, I just basically started doing these healthy things. But the one thing that I didn't do was I didn't change my lifestyle. And I really hadn't found happiness. I still wanted that bar life. I still wanted the women. I still wanted that. I yearned for that old using. And I never changed that in my life. So when the doctor that day, after asking me what I had changed, finally gave me a clean bill of health, I went out and did what probably every addict would have done. I bought an 8-ball of cocaine and I started using cocaine again. I wouldn't go back to alcohol this time. Everybody in my life had told me alcohol is your problem. You know, you really struggled with the drinking. You know, you were a sloppy, messy drunk. So I didn't go back to alcohol, but I did go back to cocaine use. And the cocaine use, what often a lot of addicts will tell you is that when you fall back into something, you fall back in right where you left off, and it quickly escalates to be worse than it was before. And this is exactly what happened with me. I started using cocaine, and I started using excessive amounts of cocaine. Like, it was not a strange thing for me to go through 3 to 4 grams of cocaine a day, which maybe to some wasn't excessive, but it was to me. It caused me a lot of anxiety, I was constantly, I think I had a lot of psychosis. I was constantly hearing things in the next rooms or around me, or thought that somebody was at my door, the police were gonna come and get me. And it just caused me, I lost a lot of weight. I think I lost 20 or 30 pounds. I was really, really unhealthy, and somehow in the midst of all this unhealthiness, I managed to meet this woman. And we started dating, and I mean, I kind of kept my cocaine use a little bit under control when we first started dating, but I remember that didn't last very long, and it wasn't too long after we started dating, I think right around the 6-month mark, that she came to me and said that she was pregnant. And I was like, holy shit, like, this can't be happening. I can't even look after myself right now. How am I going to look after a kid? And I remember I just had this thought, like, it was almost a thought of dread, like, I really have to work on getting my shit together here. After finding out that my girlfriend was pregnant with my daughter, and realizing that I wanted to be this father that I knew I could be, this fantastic dad, this is truly where my battles with addiction really started. I had struggled a lot with mental health through my life, with depression, anxiety. I'm a positive I'm ADHD still to this day, but all those things. But this is where the actual addiction took hold of my life. This is where it really grabbed me, and I felt like I couldn't get out of it. And what was happening is I would tell myself, I got to stay sober for my daughter. I have to stay sober for my daughter. And then I would relapse. I'd be sober for 7 days, 9 days, 2 weeks, and then I'd relapse. And I would feel hopeless. I'd feel worthless, feel useless. I'd feel weak. I'd feel absolutely atrocious about myself. And when you feel like that, you know one thing that's going to make you feel better, and it's that drug. So I would go back to that drug, and it would give me that brief moment of clarity and that feeling, and that lift me up, but it was so brief. And then it was right back to that hopeless, useless, worthless feeling. And I would start using again, and it was like this vicious circle. It was like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And it was really, really spiraling out of control. It was just that same thing over and over again. And finally, before I knew it, it's February 2nd, 2009, and I'm in RUH hospital and my daughter's being born. And I really haven't got control of anything. But I remember that night, and I remember it perfectly clear. As a matter of fact, this is one of my clearest memories of my entire life. Was the night that my daughter was born, and I just remember her mom was sleeping, and my doctor had put my daughter in my arms, and I held her in my arms, and I made this promise to her, and I remember I sang to her, and I looked at her and I said, I promise that I'm not gonna make you feel how I felt sometimes when I was a kid. And I promise that I'm not going to hurt you, and I promise that I'm going to be the dad that you deserve to have, and I promise that I'm never going to use drugs and alcohol again. And 8 hours later, I found myself in the parking lot of the Royal University Hospital with my drug dealer doing cocaine off of a CD case. And that was kind of it for me. That was the spot where I thought, this is hopeless. If I can't do it for this kid, then who can I do it for? I went into a very, very, very dark place for the next year of my life. And to be honest, it was probably closer to 2 years of my life, the next 2 years of my life, that were going to be like my downfall, almost my demise. So I was just feeling that hopeless. I kept relapsing over and over again, and things were getting worse. I lost my job. I had no money. And what happened was I started stealing from my daughter's mom and lying to her all the time, like telling her, oh, I didn't get my paycheck this week. So I would use what that paycheck that I did have to give to my drug dealer so I could get more drugs, and tell her that we didn't have it. Not only that, I started stealing money from her purse. I found out what her bank card number was. I started stealing money from her bank accounts, and this was money that was needed to keep a roof over our head, keep the power on, keep formula in the fridge for our daughter, and basically just keep everything going. And I was stealing this money, and I felt tremendous amounts of guilt tied in with all the other shame and everything that came with it. And eventually, my daughter's mom couldn't take this anymore, and she said, you've got to go. And it really wasn't a surprise to me when this happened. And at this point, I did what many addicts do. I ran from my problems. I thought I could relocate, and I thought, you know what? If I move somewhere else other than here, I won't know anybody. I won't know the cocaine dealers. There won't be anybody to drink with. I'll just change location. But the problem is when you're an addict, is that you always find somebody to do drugs with. And I had added alcohol back into the mix now too, so I was drinking again. So at this point, things were very problematic in my life, and I chose to move to a different location. I moved away from Saskatoon and away from my daughter, and this certainly did not help. As I said, when you're an addict and you move somewhere, you can always find what you're looking for. My drinking had escalated to high amounts again, and it didn't take me long at my new location to find drug dealers and to get my hands on cocaine. And this was not a good combination, and mix that with the fact that the whole meaning behind my life at this point was my daughter, and I'd moved away from her, and this was killing me. This was just reiterating that I was not the father that I wanted to be. And then, like I said, then you just keep mixing those feelings of shame and hopelessness together, and it was not a good mix. And it didn't take long before where I moved to, things didn't work out there. And I remember I caused a really good friend of mine a lot of hardships over that time that I was there, and that's still a tough time with that to this day. And eventually I would move home. I moved back to Davidson, and I got a job at that same place that I was working at when I was 18 years old, called Panther Industries. And this, over these next 9 months, I would virtually start to lose everything in my life. I would start to lose my family. My sisters, they didn't know what to do. They knew my drinking was out of control, and they were scared. And there came a point where they basically were like, we just can't have you around our kids anymore by yourself or looking after our kids. Or it kind of, I think, in all honesty, they probably didn't even really want me at their place. I was such a mess. And my parents, I stole from my parents. I lied to my parents. I treated my parents probably almost as bad, if not worse, than I treated anybody else in the world. I used them, and they eventually had enough and said, I'm sorry, we can't take this anymore. I was in and out of detoxes and rehabs. I probably spent, I think in 2011, I was in Larson House probably upwards of 11 times. Went to a few treatment centers. None of that worked. I was really didn't lose any friends. I just stopped talking to them because I was locked in my own apartment trying to drink myself to death. I almost lost my job, and my health was failing. I was starting, every time I tried to quit drinking, at this point, which had become drinking had become my major problem at that point, just because I had very little money and cocaine wasn't easily accessible where I was. So I had basically got rid of the cocaine. I would only get it every once in a while. And when I did have it, I used extreme amounts of it. But I had basically replaced that with about 80 to 100 ounce a day alcohol habit. And this was causing serious problems with my health. When I tried to quit drinking, I would have seizures. I broke all the teeth off in the back of my mouth. I have no teeth back there from having those seizures. I remember I bit halfway through my tongue and had to go get a bunch of stitches in my tongue, and I kept all this quiet because I was so ashamed of it and I didn't want my family to know about it. So I didn't tell anybody really what was going on. And I was borderline losing my job, as I had mentioned, and I was lucky to have good support there. And then there came the time where kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. And I remember, because I was struggling quite a bit, very hard with alcohol at this time, and I remember my daughter's mom phoned me, and she said, "Where are you?" And I was pissed off and defensive right away, and I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because you're supposed to be here." And I said, "I'm not supposed to be there till Wednesday." And she said, "What day do you think it is, Brad?" And I said, "It's Sunday." And she said, "It is Wednesday today. You're supposed to be here to pick up your daughter." And I remember she had a work conference that she was supposed to be flying out for or something like that. And I had promised her I would take our daughter, and I had promised I would be sober, which I did all the time. And she said to me, "The last couple times you picked up our daughter, I've smelled booze on your breath." And she said, "I just kind of hoped that it was from the night before." And she said, "I'm really starting to fear for the well-being of our daughter when she's with you, because you drink all the time." And she said, "And now with this," she said, "when I get back from this trip, I'm going to file for sole custody of our daughter." And man, it was like somebody punched me so hard that they punched through my chest, grabbed my heart, and ripped it out and held it right in front of me. And I just remember how I felt for those next 7 days when she was gone, thinking that there might be a possibility that I could never see my daughter again. And I knew right then, I had to change. So I remember it was sometime in that first week after my ex had told me that she was going to take our daughter away, that I reached out for help. And I remember I called this guy that I worked with at Panther. And Panther Industries, just to make this perfectly clear, is where I worked when I was younger, and I was working again now. And Panther Industries were probably their saving grace in my life. They supported me while I went to detox. They knew the problems I was having. They allowed me to keep my job when I was only going sometimes 3 days every 2 weeks. And they stuck by me. And I even remember the boss from there, his name's Clayton. I remember him one time I was really in a bad spot. He had me in, he brought me into his house and let me basically detox there. And I remember I phoned Panther and I said, I remember there was this guy, Johnny, who had went through the Teen Challenge program. And I phoned Panther and I said to the boss, I said, "I'm doing terrible again, and I really need to talk to John." So he put John on, and I said, "Hey, John," I said, I'm in a really bad spot and I'm thinking about going to Teen Challenge. And he said, "Okay, give me a few minutes." And he hung up the phone. And about 20 minutes later, John walked through the door and waded through the empty bottles and I think there was one empty 40 on the counter or on the table in front of me, and one that was half drank. And he put the forms down for Teen Challenge. He put them in front of me, and he said, "Do what you got to do. Finish that or don't. But as soon as you're done that, fill these forms out and get them in." And I said, "Okay." And I remember I knew that I had to change, and so I filled out the forms to Teen Challenge. I got all the information on it. Found out it was a year-long faith-based program. I talked to this amazing guy there, and I applied, and I got in. I remember I had to, in between the time that I got in, I can't remember how many weeks it was. It wasn't very long. They wanted me to go to detox, and I remember that I went to detox. And there was this guy at detox, and like I said, I'd been to detox like 14 times in the last 14 months probably, or something ridiculous like that. It was, and I shouldn't laugh about it. It was not a good situation. But I remember there was this guy there that I really gravitated to, and his name was Jack, and he was like one of the addictions counselors there. He worked mostly the night shift, and I couldn't ever sleep well because I was so sick when I would go there with all my withdrawals and DTs and sometimes the seizures, that I would sit up late at night a lot and talk to Jack. And I remember I went in this time, and I said to Jack, and I said, "Jack," and he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "I'm going to Teen Challenge." And Jack said to me, "So what?" And I was just deflated. I'm like, "So what? It's a year-long program. It's going to change, Jack." And he said, "Brad, nothing's going to change if you don't change." He said, "You're a smart guy. You're a great guy." But he said, "You got to change." He said, "Enough of this shit. What do you want to do with your life?" And it seemed like just a split second, but it was probably a lot longer. I said, "I want your job." And Jack said, then go to the Teen Challenge program. It's a great program. And change yourself and work on yourself and come back and get this job. And that was like it. That combined with the urge to be such a good father, and knowing that I needed to do this to keep my daughter in my life, that lit that fire under my ass that I needed. And I remember I seen this woman who was at the time she was the manager there, and her name was Heather. I seen her almost within the same day, maybe within a day or two of that time, and she said the same thing. She said, like, "Listen, you got to change. You got to get your shit together if you want to do this. So go make this program work. Go change yourself, Brad." She said, "You can do that. You can do this." And it just so happens that that woman is my boss right now. So with all that encouragement and with all that support and with the help of Jack and Heather and John and Clayton from Panther and everyone else, I made it. I dragged my ass up the steps of Teen Challenge on August 21st, 2012, a completely broken man. So I guess you guys can probably figure out the math. It's 2021. That was August 21st, 2012. I'm coming up on 9 years clean, which is an amazing feat, and I'm extremely proud of it. And I kind of stopped my story right there because that's where my recovery began. And I'm on this recovery journey right now. I call this the long road of recovery, because I don't call it the long road to recovery because I don't think there's a final destination for recovery. I think recovery is a constant fight. It's a constant battle. It's something that you live with every day. And over the last 9 years, I looked back and I thought, you know what? What's helped me in my recovery? What's made my recovery possible? And I came up with 10 things. And those 10 things are, I had to write them down, sorry, because I'm terrible at remembering things. Number 1, self-care. Number 2, healthy connections. Number 3, goals and planning. Number 4, I call it housekeeping, but it's basically boundaries. Number 5, owning your own shit, which touches a lot on honesty. Number 6, forgiveness. Number 7, vulnerability. Number 8, positivity and happiness. Number 9, managing past traumas, which ties in with perseverance. And number 10, and probably one of the most important ones, is the maintenance of all of those things. These are what we're going to talk about over the next 10 sessions. So I think it's important before we wrap this up to explain how things are going to look from here on in. As I mentioned, there's approximately 10 sessions. We're hoping to lay out one session a month. We're not sure exactly when those dates are going to be yet. We will keep you posted. Check the bottom of this page for a banner that will update you. So we're going to have one session a month. So we're going to start with, I think we said self-care. So self-care may roll out sometime in early February or March, depending on what happens here. Once that rolls out, approximately 2 weeks from the very day that we release that video, we're going to do a live Q&A on the We Connect page. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to register. There'll be some details on the bottom of the page for this as well. Register, watch the video at your own convenience whenever you like, and then register for the live Q&A session if you're interested. Ask some questions, make some comments, let me know what you think. Helpful, not helpful, this could be changed, add this in. I love all the feedback I can get. I learn as much in my job from the clients. I learn more from my clients than I can ever give them. So I would love to have you guys give me honest feedback, ask questions, and just have a fantastic discussion around all of this stuff that's going on. The whole thing that this group is about is connection. So to me, it's so important to form that connection, to be able to come on here, talk honestly, be vulnerable, share stuff, and help heal each other. So I look forward to connecting with you guys in the very near future.
Whisper in the only hemisphere that understands embracing fear. It's not about drawing nearer the rush of life, but not really the better for having found will to survive. This time maybe there is an answer. Approach a challenge without a crime. Dragonet wide across the ocean's floor, hold it strong and pull for more till the hogs to the shore to find the best that the world it has to offer. You pick and choose what meets your eyes. Be selective, discern what's going to lift you up into the sky. Outrospective, only accept